Gunshot residue, GSR, also known as cartridge discharge residue, CDR, gunfire residue, GFR, or firearm discharge residue, FDR, is residue deposited on the hands and clothes of someone who discharges a firearm. It is principally composed of burnt and unburnt particles from the explosive primer, the propellant, and possibly fragments of the bullet, cartridge case, and the firearm. Law enforcement investigators test the clothing and skin of people for GSR to determine if they were near a gun when it discharged. Gunshot residue can travel over 3-5 feet, 0.9-1.5 meters, from the gun. At the farthest distance, only a few trace particles may be present. History. In 1971, John Boehm presented some micrographs of GSR particles found during the examination of bullet entrance holes using a scanning electron microscope. If the scanning electron microscope is equipped with an energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy detector, the chemical elements present in such particles, mainly lead, antimony and barium, can be identified. In 1979, Walton et al. Proposed a classification of GSR based on composition, morphology, and size. 4 compositions were considered characteristic: lead, antimony, and barium. Barium, calcium, and silicon. Antimony. Barium. The authors proposed some rules about chemical elements that could also be present in these particles. Wallace and McQuillan published a new classification of the GSR particles in 1984. They labeled as unique particles those that contain lead, antimony, and barium, or that contain antimony and barium. Wallace and McQuillan also maintained that these particles could contain only some chemical elements. Current practice. In the latest ASTM standard guide for GSR analysis by scanning electron microscopy/energy dispersive X-ray spectrometry, SEM-EDX, particles containing lead, antimony and barium, and respecting some rules related to the morphology and to the presence of other elements are considered characteristic of GSR. The most definitive method to determine whether a particle is characteristic of or consistent with GSR is by its elemental profile. An approach to the identification of particles characteristic of or consistent with GSR is to compare the elemental profile of the recovered particulate with that collected from case-specific known source items, such as the recovered weapon, cartridge cases, or victim-related items whenever necessary. This approach was called case-by-case by Romolo and Margot in an article published in 2001. In 2010, Dalby et al. Published the latest review on the subject and concluded that the adoption of a case-by-case approach to GSR analysis must be seen as preferable, in agreement with Romolo and Margot. In light of similar particles produced from extraneous sources, both Mosher et al. 1998, and Grima et al. 2012, presented evidence of pyrotechnic particles that can be mistakenly identified as GSR. Both publications highlight that certain markers of exclusion and reference to the general population of collected particulate can help the expert in designating GSR similar particles as firework sourced. Particle analysis by scanning electron microscope equipped with an energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy detector is the most powerful forensic tool that investigators can use to determine a subject's proximity to a discharging firearm or contact with a surface exposed to GSR, firearm, spent cartridge case, target hole. Test accuracy requires procedures that avoid secondary gunshot residue transfer from police officers onto subjects or items to be tested, and that avoid contamination in the laboratory. The 2 main groups of specialists currently active on gunshot residue analysis are the Scientific Working Group for Gunshot Residue, SWGGSR, based in USA, and the NFCEWG Firearm/GSR Working Group based in Europe. Results. A positive result for GSR from SEM-EDX analysis can mean many things. Mainly it indicates that the person sampled was either in the vicinity of a gun when it was fired, handled a gun after it was fired, or touched something that was around the gun when it was fired. For example, when a person goes to the aid of a victim of a gunshot wound, some GSR particles can transfer from the victim. A negative result can mean that the person was nowhere near the gun when it was fired, or that they were near it but not close enough for GSR to land on them, or it can mean that the GSR deposited on them wore off. GSR is the consistency of flour and typically only stays on the hands of a living person for 4-6 hours. Wiping the hands on anything, even putting them in and out of pockets, can transfer GSR off the hands. Victims don't always get GSR on them, even suicide victims can test negative for GSR. Matching GSR to a specific source. If the ammunition used was specifically tagged in some way by special elements, it is possible to know the cartridge used to produce the GSR. Inference about the source of GSR can be based on the examination of the particles found on a suspect and the population of particles found on the victim, in the firearm or in the cartridge case, as suggested by the ASTM Standard Guide for GSR Analysis by Scanning Electron Microscopy/Energy Dispersive X-ray Spectrometry. Advanced analytical techniques such as ion beam analysis, (EBA), carried out after scanning electron microscopy, can support further information allowing to infer about the source of GSR particles. Christopher et al. Showed as the grouping behavior of different makes of ammunition can be determined using multivariate analysis. Bullets can be matched back to a gun using comparative ballistics. Organic gunshot residue. Organic gunshot residue can be analyzed by analytical techniques such as chromatography, capillary electrophoresis, and mass spectrometry.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.